used to speaking to one of these things. Usually I just project loud enough, but not so loud that my students can't sleep during class. I try to keep it down. Have any of you ever been thrown out someplace? Like thrown out, kicked out? Like maybe a party, or a class, or a restaurant or something? Anybody? This lecture is rather controversial. I don't know if you knew that or not. It all started with me almost getting kicked out of someplace. And then I decided I'm going to do a lecture about this. And in so doing, it almost got me kicked out of another establishment. I was talking with some friends about my plans to do this lecture, and there were some people who didn't appreciate what I had to say. And so in the course of just a few month period, I almost got booed twice. So I thought, this has to be some good stuff. Who knew I was so controversial? It's not a secret that exercise makes us healthy. That exercise can be used to help treat disease. But what we know and what we do are often two different things. Often two very different things. Especially when it comes to the world of academia or even medical science. It's quite common for us to know one thing from research and do another. And I'm going to point some of those instances out. But 20 years ago when I was at Kansas State, I took a class called Exercise and Disease. And I had always sort of been under the understanding that you exercise and you're healthy, and you don't and you're not. It was the first time anyone ever presented to me the idea that we could use exercise as a form of medicine. That was 20 years ago. The textbook was a couple years old, so the research that was in it was probably 5 years old before that. So this has been around a while. And I don't just mean the concept, I mean like with empirical evidence backed up with research. So, exercise as medicine is this apparently controversial idea that we can look at the disease state, or we can look at exercise as not only a way to treat disease, but as a way to prevent it, and even in some cases cure it. Some people find the cure part very controversial. But in most of the research I'm going to discuss tonight, what they found is that the exercise prescription doesn't just help in the disease process, in a lot of cases. It doesn't just help the efficacy of medication, but in some cases it can reverse what's going on with the person. That's called cure. So it's this notion that we can treat chronic disease with exercise. Now I'm going to make a pretty bold statement and say that exercise is the most powerful drug in the world. Anybody think I'm kind of overreaching with that statement a little bit? The most powerful. Because it not only treats chronic illness, but it also treats all of these illnesses simultaneously. If I went to a pharmaceutical company and I said, I have a drug for you that I just invented, it'll treat about a dozen or more of our most common chronic illnesses, and it does it all at the same time. It treats all of them simultaneously. You think they'd be interested? I think to sell it. But like I say, good health makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make a lot of dollars. I'm talking about preventing, curing, reversing, treating early death, type 2 diabetes, coronary artery disease, congestive heart failure, high cholesterol, hypertension. It's useful in pain management, Alzheimer's disease, fall prevention, osteoporosis, male reproduction, asthma, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, insomnia, and in the reduction of respiratory infection and cancer risk. all at the same time. The reason why I say it makes a lot of sense but not a lot of dollars is our pharmaceutical industry is invested in producing medicine and selling medicine. It's hard for me to compete if I showed up at the clinic with a pair of running shoes. I know a pharmaceutical rep does very well at this job. Sells enough medicine, apparently. She managed to buy all 6 of her kids an iPad for Christmas and take them to Disneyland for Christmas. Now, this isn't about social envy or anything like that, but like I said, it's hard for me to show up with my pair of running shoes and compete with that. But we sort of have the system that we have. So does it work? Does exercise used as medicine work? Well, we know that patients are 5 times more likely to adhere to an exercise prescription if they get a prescription written out by their physician or care provider and handed to them. We would never, I say we, medical science, or medical practitioners, I should say, would never think of giving somebody medicine and saying, well, you have pneumonia, here you go. I'd look at it and I'd say, well, how often do you want me to take it? How long do you want me to take it? What can I expect with this? But we do that with exercise all the time. And I saw it working in medical clinics where we look at a patient and on their way out the door we'd say, oh yeah, by the way, I'm trying to lose a little bit of weight. Or we'd say, you really need to try to exercise. And so we never really gave it maybe the importance that it deserved. Because we know, like I said, that if we write out that prescription and hand it to them, they're much, much, much more likely to adhere to it. If I told you there's a way, nurses, physicians, PAs, nurse practitioners, you can get your patient 5 times more likely to adhere to the treatment program, you'd probably be interested, right? This is where getting thrown out of an establishment comes in. So, I was at a medical conference, and there was a physician there, and she was talking about exercise and health. And so I thought that I was going to get what I'm presenting you tonight. But it wasn't, and so you can imagine my disappointment. So of course I raised my hand, and that's where it all started. I said, there's a physician who was giving a lecture. I said, so you recommend exercise, and exercise is very helpful for disease and disease prevention. I said, how many times have you ever written down an exercise prescription and given it to a patient? She said, well, I know they're not going to do it, so I'm not going to bother. I'm not sure if she knew that they would be 5 times more likely to do it if she gave them a prescription. How long? How much? What type? What's the frequency? And so I kept asking her. I kept saying, well, if I was a physician, I mean, I'm not, so I'm not going to pretend to be, but if I knew that there were 2 treatments for something, and I only presented you one, and I knowingly withheld the other, and I said a word that you don't say around physicians, so that's kind of like malpractice. I should have known right then that I was going to get the boot. And again, she said, well, why should I even bother if they're not going to do it? Well, would you tell your alcoholic patient, we need to do something about your drinking? Would you tell your patient who smoked too much, or smoked at all, we need to do something about your drinking? Yeah. Even if you knew that they probably wouldn't listen to you the first time. And again, if you had 2 treatments on the table, and you only offered one, it's a little disingenuous. And so it wasn't an indictment of her, although I should have predicted what was going to happen. But it was an indictment of the whole medical system. That if we have this treatment option, and we know that it's efficacious, why are we withholding it? The other thing is, sometimes patients don't want to exercise all their lives. They'd rather take a pill. And so we have to think about that as well. That it's not necessarily the case where inside every single person is an athlete just trying to break out. And so that's the other thing we have to think about is when you tell them, okay, you can take this medication, which they'll probably end up taking all their life, if it's a chronic illness, or you can exercise the rest of your life. That sounds kind of daunting to a lot of people. And honestly, I get the question asked all the time, why do they need an exercise prescription? Well, for the great majority of us, when we think back to exercise, we think back to high school football, we think back to our high school PE class or something. A lot of times it wasn't very physical and wasn't very educational. And so we think, gosh, I have to do that? I have to climb the rope? I've got to run sprints on football. What do I even do? And again, you wouldn't have to make medication and say, well, take this every once in a while or whenever you feel like it. You tell them, right, exactly how to take that medication. So the other thing that we have to consider is that some people don't want to exercise all their life. There are risks and benefits, just like any drug. You can complicate cardiovascular illness. You can complicate musculoskeletal problems. And so it's not as if we just, Ryan's a better exercise prescription. Right? I mean, we still have to take some of these things into consideration. We can still exacerbate problems. There's also the problem of underdosing and overdosing. You can underdo it, just like you can with medication. And you can overdo it, just like you can with medication. And there's also what's called the dose-response curve, where you may see results initially, but then the results taper. And so it may have to be adjusted. So you give somebody an exercise prescription, just like any other medication, it may have to be adjusted. There are a few things that we can do. Most of these aren't any secret. We know them very well, but we also know that there's kind of a disconnect between what we know and what we do. Because if you ask most smokers, well, don't you know that's bad for you? What do they say? Yeah. Or if you ask somebody, well, don't you know that drinking too much is bad for you? Well, yeah. Don't you know that exercise is good for you? Most people say yes. We have this idea, well, if we just educate people, if we just help them understand. How many people in here know that exercise is good for you? It's not an education problem. Right? It's an adherence problem. But we know there are simple few things that we can do, like not smoking, physical activity, maintaining a normal weight. We can add almost a decade to our years by just doing these few things. The scary part is, in our society, even though we know that smoking is bad for us, that unhealthy weight is bad for us, 85% of Americans have at least one of these diseases. That's a lot of people. And 75% of all of our deaths in America are due to stroke, coronary artery disease, and cancer. Now, there are people who will die of an MI, of a cardiac infarction, who are marathon runners, who are vegetarians. They throw a plaque occlusion and have a heart attack. It happens. We're not going to prevent all heart attacks. We're not going to prevent all strokes. Anybody who's studied the plumbing system in the brain usually comes away amazed that it works at all. We're not going to prevent all strokes. We're not going to prevent all cancers. But again, when the majority of us will die with these diseases, again, there's a disconnect between what we know and how we live our lives. We also have this idea that the aging process equals chronic illness. In our society, we watch people get old, get sick, and die. But it's not an automatic part of the aging process. It doesn't have to be. In fact, we know many cultures where that's not the common path that people go down. And yet it's gotten so common here that that's sort of the normal progression that we believe should happen. The average 65-year-old takes 4 prescription meds. The average 85-year-old takes 14 prescription meds. I'm told by a physician, patients taking more than 4 meds don't ever give another one without taking one of them away, because there's no way you're going to take that many meds without them having some kind of interaction, adverse reaction a lot of times. Now, this is where it gets controversial. The American medical system is the third leading cause of death in America. Then I really would have got thrown out. The third leading cause of death. I'd like to point out that there are more deaths in the American medical system than there are due to gunshot wounds. We have legislation going on right now about gun laws and gun control, right? Where's all the frenzy about our medical system? It has to do with paying the bill, right? But more people will die in the American medical system than from gunshot wounds, of all kinds, by the way, homicide, suicide, accidental death, or accidental shooting. Because of drug interactions, more people will die in the American medical system because of drug interactions, drug overdoses, medical malpractice, accidents in hospitals, mix-up in hospitals. You take all of those reasons that people would die in the medical system, it's the third leading cause of death in America. Now, it's a pretty bold statement. And to be fair, if you've ever taken antibiotics, you probably have the medical system to be thankful that you're here to hear this lecture. Because most of us would owe our lives to the American medical system based on the fact that we've been able to avoid a lot of diseases that folks in other countries haven't been able to avoid. And so it's not an indictment of the American medical system, but I think even the most conservative physician or nurse or PA would agree that the more you can stay off medication and out of the hospital, the better off you're going to be. Here are the top 10 pain medications here in America. Narcotic pain relievers. In fact, I just heard that narcotic pain reliever overdose has surpassed cocaine and heroin overdose as far as deaths in America go. Narcotic pain relievers. Sometimes avoidable, sometimes not. Statin drugs for high cholesterol. Some people genetically have high cholesterol, so is it always avoidable? Not necessarily, but in many, many cases, it's lifestyle. Beta blockers, hypertension, different heart conditions. Thyroid hormone. You can run a marathon and still have hypothyroidism. Proton pump inhibitors, antacids, anti-ulcer medications. A lot of that is lifestyle. Antibiotics. You can be very, very fit, be able to do 100 pull-ups and still need antibiotics. Biophosphonates for osteoporosis. Oral hypoglycemics for diabetes. And non-steroidal anti-inflammatories for pain and inflammation. Now, not all these medications are avoidable. However, many of them are linked to lifestyle. Many of them can be treated with exercise. And again, this isn't some notion that exercise is healthy for us and we should just all do it. We have 30 years of empirical evidence that says that for mild to moderate depression, an exercise prescription is as effective, not nearly as effective as Zoloft, as some of our other antidepressants. It also has a positive effect on medication efficacy. You can enhance how well the medication is going to work simply by exercising as well. Notice I said produce similar or almost similar results. So why do people exercise? We'll talk a little bit more about this at the end, why people don't exercise. But a lot of times, the doctor doesn't know about the efficacy. They get a lot of pharmacology training, they get a lot of biochemistry training, they better know their molecular biology. But exercise science, exercise physiology, sports and recreation, how do you set up an exercise prescription? So a lot of times they're just not trained in that. And you got to forgive them because in the 14 years of education that they had to have, maybe they just couldn't fit it in. So, I mean, you know, they're very competent practitioners, but a lot of times their training just doesn't include exercise. The pharmaceutical industry is in the business of making medication. Again, it's very hard to compete with, you know, I think Zoloft made $3 billion last year. Again, I show up in my running shoes. Hey, let's go for a jog. Why do you compete with an industry like that? A lot of times patients don't know how to go about it, and that's where it's incumbent upon the healthcare practitioner to be able to dispense this information. Well, how often do I need to exercise? Well, how much? Was it safe? Can I do this with my condition? What kind of considerations do I need to make? And honestly, the medical system is involved in illness. If you have to see 30 or 40 patients today, that exercise prescription and discussing it takes a lot of time. So to be fair, when you have a waiting room full of people, sometimes it's just easier to hand out medication than it is to explain how to go about exercise. We have to get past this idea that how we look equates to health. I've had people ask me before, well, I've been like this for 50 years. I'm supposed to just start exercising now? Or, well, I'm never going to look like that. Governor Arnold. So what's the point? Well, from day one, exercise can start helping. And so I can still have a pot belly, but I'm sticking to my exercise prescription, and guess what? Even if I still have my pot belly, I can watch my cholesterol numbers start to go down. I can watch, my hypertension start to go down. And so I don't have to achieve a certain look in order to know that I've gotten the result, in other words. And so we have to get out of the idea that, well, until I look like that, it's not working. And the other thing is, when we don't look like that, what happens? We get discouraged, right? Well, if I've been like this for 20 years, it's not going to happen overnight, right? So we have to stop equating how we look with whether or not the exercise prescription is helping, because from day one, it's helping. That's what I want everybody to do. If you are unable physically to stand up very easily and to move, I want you to just raise your hands above your head and back down like you're pressing something up. And if you can stand up and move, go ahead and stand up for me. You weren't going to go to an exercise lecture without getting up and moving. Okay, this is what I want you to do. If all you can do is this, do this. If you're able to, jump with me. Keep jumping. Keep jumping. If everybody does it, you won't feel foolish. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead and sit down. Guess what? The darndest thing just happened right there. You're producing something called dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Those are the same chemicals your doctor gives you if you go in and say, I feel kind of depressed. You're producing them right now. That's the same medication you might get if you say, I'm having some memory problems, doc. You're producing them right now. Well, you were 10 seconds ago. And so, again, this notion that a pill for every ill is going to cure me is incorrect. Most of the time, medication just mimics what our body does on its own. Helps it out, enhances it a little bit. And so things like depression, ADHD, things like dementia are all helped by this brain chemistry that we're producing when we exercise. One of the things about exercise and ADHD is it doesn't just burn off energy for kids. It also prepares the brain for growth, for learning. In our older population, it also helps prepare the brain for growth and for learning. Neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, building new neural connections. And so, once again, we can prescribe exercise for these folks and treat it just like we treat it with medication. Now, does that mean every ADHD kid, all you gotta do is get them up moving around? I get it. I get that there's some brain chemistry issues that, some kids may just have to be on medication. But I don't think it's any accident. When I was doing research for this lecture, I thought, I wonder how much ADHD diagnosis has gone up in the last 15 years. 42%. 42% more kids apparently have ADHD now than they did 15 years ago. It's increased 42%. So I thought, well, that's interesting. I know we've been reducing recess and PE in a lot of our schools. I wonder how much it's decreased over the last 15 years. I thought, I wonder if it's similar. Guess what it was? 42%. Exactly 42%. Exactly parallels the rise in ADHD diagnosis. Now, I wasn't around 150 years ago, but I have this idea that I don't think there were a lot of little Native American kids running around with ADHD. I'm guessing that they probably had an adult that came alongside them and said, we're going to teach you how to hunt and fish and trap and to gather food and to plant food and to cook and skin animals, all these things. I'm willing to bet that a lot of their life was filled with hands-on stuff that they were doing, and they were physically active, and they had somebody instructing them how to do it that was right there beside them. They were probably surrounded by people who cared about them and people that they cared about. And they probably spent most of their life like this. I can't imagine that there were little Native American children bouncing off the TV all over. And same thing with pioneer kids. It's not exclusive to Native Americans. I can't imagine little pioneer kids bouncing off the inside of the covered Bible. I imagine that they probably had somebody who came along beside them and said, I'm going to teach you how to do these things. And it was very hands-on, it was very physical. The labor that they had to do, and hauling water and things like that. And so this ADHD thing, I don't doubt that it doesn't exist. This is where I almost got thrown out of the other establishment when I was talking about ADHD. Apparently not everybody shares my belief. But I have a feeling that when you ask young children to sit in rows, stand in line, don't stand up, don't speak out, don't draw attention to yourself, that we have a lot of kids who are not suffering from ADHD, but they're suffering from childhood. We've gone in, I say we, psychologists, counselors, researchers have gone into schools and have increased physical education at recess. And guess what we found? Test scores go up. Well, we've been told for the last 15 years that we have to reduce PE in recess because we have to increase class time, we have to get our test scores up, we have to increase math and science, right? Well, we should be cranking out geniuses by this point. I mean, we've eliminated art, theater, PE, recess. But you know what? When you take those schools, and they represent the country as a whole, the schools that increase their PE program, we compete very well with the rest of the world. So there's a school in California. I was reading some research where they went in and increased recess, increased physical education. The kids were moving. It wasn't stand all around and play kickball. It was like real movement for about 60 minutes a day. And they watched the test scores go up. It was the darndest thing. And so somebody said, well, yeah, that might be at some rich affluent school in California, but you can't do it at a small poor school. Actually, a bigger poor school. So they went to a bigger poor school in Chicago. Did the same thing. They had one gym, one PE teacher. They said, we're going to have PE every single day for 60 minutes. They watched their suspension rates go down from 95 in one semester to 4 the next semester. Now, we have this desire to imply causality to whatever we do. Oh, it must be the reason. I'm not saying one thing made the other thing happen, but when you can just add PE, when you can just add time to your PE class, we don't need a bunch of extra funding and extra research done, extra this and extra that. It's going to cost the taxpayers this much, and just do it. Just add 30 minutes to your PE day, or maybe in some schools, just add PE. We know that in Europe, they've increased PE in some schools to 90 minutes, and they've watched test scores go up. So, I'm not really confrontational, but anybody who says, well, we need all that class time, This No Child Left Behind thing, we can't do it. We got to have extra math, extra science, we got to eliminate PE. I'm standing up here right now saying bull. Not true. And we have piles of research. Not just a few studies I mentioned. Enough research to make that table collapse that this is the case. It's just easier not to. Anybody ever tried to get anything changed in the education system? Works real well, doesn't it? Yeah. And like I said, this PE does a lot more than just burns off energy. It prepares their brain to learn. It prepares their brain to learn. One of the things that I learned doing counseling with professional cyclists in Boulder, Colorado. There are no professional cyclists in Boulder, Colorado that actually made a practice out of counseling with professional cyclists. I found that when a lot of them would retire, they would come to counseling. And come to find out they've been treating things like depression, they've been treating things like ADHD, they've been treating things like bipolar disorder by cycling. They just didn't know it. And now that they have all this time on their hands, they're not writing 6 hours a day, they're not able to concentrate, they're not able to hold a job, they're not able to, do other things. And now they start seeking counseling. Depression. More people will miss work because of depression than any other reason today. When I had you jumping around, you were producing the exact chemicals the doctor's going to prescribe to you to make you feel better. You were doing them for free right there where you sat. In every study I've seen, exercise has always beaten medication, or at least been as good as. In fact, the most recent piece of research I was looking at came out of Duke University. I have a feeling that they know what they're doing there at Duke University, at their medical school. And what they did was they found they had a group that they put on antidepressant medication. They had a group that they put on exercise, and they had a group that they put on both. And at the end of 4 months, guess what? The depression rates were all the same. The medication-only folks, same depression rate as the exercise-only folks. And the people who got both, same depression level. One of the things that interests me is when you look at societies, Aboriginal societies, native peoples, whether it's Africa or Australia or anywhere, they have very, very low depression rates. They also have very, very low ADHD rates, which may prove my theory. But these are people who lead very physical lives. And so the most common thing among all of these cultures is physical activity. These are places where they had to look for over 2,000 people in this area or tribe or community before they could find one person who had something that looked like depression. In my classroom, I can look out and predict that almost 20% of them do. In one of my classrooms. You guys might be like, well, I was in one of your classrooms, I'd be depressed too. But they have people looking for depressed people in some of these cultures. And the number one thing that they all have in common is that they lead very physical lives. Now, this is what's called adaptive survival movement. Right? They're not training for an ultramarathon or for a triathlon. They're carrying water, or they're carrying a light load, or maybe they're running, or they're walking, or they're swimming. They're doing natural movements. Because let's face it, exercise is not natural. Right? How many people believe me that exercise is just not natural? Okay? Now, I'm not saying you can't train for a marathon, but what I'm saying is the most healthy people among us aren't training for an ultramarathon. They're doing adaptive survival body movement. Carrying small loads, gardening, collecting food, erecting a house, tearing it down, whatever. And so doing natural movement. And we'll talk about natural movement here in just a little bit. Alzheimer's disease. We know that in Alzheimer's disease, one of the earliest predictive symptoms that we can see in Alzheimer's disease is an altered gait pattern. It predates the actual diagnosis sometimes by a year and a half. So if we can keep people moving, we can stave off depression and dementia in a lot of cases. Again, chronic illness does not have to be a part of the aging process. Now, does that mean I have the answer for Alzheimer's? No. But we know that exercise stimulates brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which stimulates memory, which stimulates learning, which stimulates neurogenesis, and and new neural connections. And so if I can keep somebody moving, and I can keep them walking, I can keep that dementia illness out here, hopefully, as long as possible. It stimulates areas of the body, or areas of the brain, that are responsible for memory. The exact areas. So we know exactly where this medication called exercise works. Insomnia. Anybody have trouble falling asleep last night? Folks with insomnia who are on exercise prescription, on the days that they exercise, fall asleep in half the time versus their non-exercise days. Again, how many Ambien commercials do we have to see in our lifetime? Male reproduction. Not males actually reproducing, but doing their part in reproduction. Let's face it, erectile dysfunction is a plumbing problem. It's a good barometer. Maybe that wasn't a good metaphor. It's a good measurement. It's a good way to tell just how good your plumbing is doing. Men who exercise regularly, 83% less need for erectile dysfunction medication. Again, if I went to a pharmaceutical company, I said, hey, I got something to fix ED 83% of the time. Think you'd be interested? We know that high-intensity weight training can boost testosterone levels in men while they're lifting 135%. Again, you turn on TV anytime between now and Super Bowl, you're probably going to see pharmaceutical advertisement for low testosterone. If we get you in the weight room and we get you lifting, we can boost your testosterone by 135%. Respiratory infection. Almost 20% less respiratory infection among folks who exercise regularly versus non-exercisers. Again, I'm just kind of throwing out this overview of just the most recent research that is out there. Cardiovascular disease. How many people picked up a macaroni noodle on your way in? Hold it up and look at it. You ever just look at a macaroni noodle? Yeah, eat it. That macaroni noodle represents roughly the same diameter and size as your largest coronary artery. It wouldn't take a lot to occlude that, would it? You know, we can talk about heart disease, we can talk about what exercise does for us, but until you hold that noodle up and try to look through it and see how tiny the hole is, and realize if that gets blocked, I'm done for. Kind of, there's a little more meaning behind it, right? 34% less use of cholesterol-lowering medication in folks who walk 10 miles a week. You do 2 miles a day, that's exercising 5 days a week. Hope I did the math right there. There's 3 kinds of people in the world, those that can do math and those that can't. 39% less hypertension among folks who exercise 5 days a week, 2 miles a day. Pain management. We have any physical therapy students in here? All right. This is to decide whether or not you pass your program. Answer this question for me. What is the most effective way, if you want to bring heat to a joint or muscle, what is the best way to do it?
Inside out.
What's that?
Inside out.
From the inside out, you guys passed. You know what? Felt out. I said, don't even come to class tomorrow. Good.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
I'm going to get kicked out of here, too. Yeah, from the inside out. Movement. We have analgesic packs. We have different lotions we can rub on. We have hot packs. We have moist heat. We have all kinds of medication and heat packs and things we can put on a joint. The best way to produce heat in a joint, if we want to warm up that joint, is movement. Or muscles also. Exercise is also considered one of the most efficacious or consistently efficacious ways to help chronic muscle pain. People who have chronic muscle pain, the best and most consistent, effective way to help them is to get them moving. Anybody know somebody with fibromyalgia? I was at a medical conference one time, exercise conference actually, and every time I go to an exercise conference, I like to do this. when it became like an open forum, I raised my hand and I said, you know, medical science has tried to connect artificial sweetener and fibromyalgia. And there's research that says there's a connection, and there's a lot of research that says there's not a connection. Some of that research comes out of the industry, by the way, that says there's not a connection. It does make me wonder why the patent holders for a lot of our artificial sweeteners are actually chemical and poison companies and not actually food companies. I'm not making any claims there, I'm just saying. But at this exercise conference, every time I go to it, I like to ask, I say, okay, how many of you, because it's all personal trainers, it's all physical therapists, I say, how many of you have a client that has fibromyalgia? And almost all of them raise their hand, or more than half of them raise their hand. And then I say, okay, how many of them seem, when you look at their diet, to consume a lot of diet soda or other artificial sweetener? All the hands stay up. Now again, that's not very scientific, right? But I've got to tell you, I've done this at least 5 times at every exercise conference that I've gone to in the last half dozen years, and it's always the same result. And so if we stop taking chemicals that were made by poison companies, and we started moving, how much did that help fibromyalgia? Or even if there's no connection, I'm completely off my rocker, we know that exercise helps fibromyalgia. I call it the gambler's gamble. If you're right, you have everything to gain. If you're wrong, you're just going to have to buy more running shoes, I guess. I don't know. You're just going to have to put up with having a fit body. Other diseases, fall prevention. Did a meta-analysis of 20 studies showing strengthening exercises for the quadriceps, for the hamstrings. There's a significant improvement found in balance. We can help folks prevent falling. Osteoporosis. We know that people who spend a significant amount of time in non-weight-bearing positions have 33% more osteoporosis. I found this among my professional cyclists that I work with. They're constantly in a gravity-independent position because they're always sitting. Most of them have bone structure like a 90-year-old woman, if you were to look at them under a bone scan. We know that people who spend a large amount of time in a non-gravity dependent position, that means not standing up, not moving, have a much higher rate of osteoporosis. Asthma. People who have asthma and exercise regularly use their rescue inhalers much, much less. Again, if I were to go to the doctor at a pharmaceutical company, I could say, hey, I can decrease how much your patient has to use their rescue inhaler. Are you interested? Get your running shoes. So this natural body movement that I was talking about brings me to the Grim Reaper study. They call it the Grim Reaper study because they took older men in Canada and they had them walk. They were on a walking program, walking regularly. And what they found was, among the people who walked 2 miles an hour, among the men who walked 2 miles an hour, they had a 1.23% less likelihood of dying during the course of the study. So some of them died, but not many. Among the men who were able to walk 3 miles an hour, no one during that study died. In fact, all the men who were able to walk 3 miles an hour, none of the subjects died. The conclusion is the Grim Reaper's preferred walking speed is 2 miles an hour or less. And therefore, if you want to avoid the Grim Reaper, you need to be able to walk 3 miles an hour. How many have heard that sitting's the new smoking? There always has to be some kind of sensational, headline in the news, right? Okay, how's this going to come in, right? Sitting's the new smoking. The average American spends 64 hours a week sitting. They spend 28 hours a week standing, and they spend 11 hours a week just doing non-exercise movement. That's maybe standing at the counter and chopping up food for dinner or something like that. By the way, that's me. It was the greatest thing. I was riding my bike along, and this woman, totally gorgeous, this knockout comes driving up beside me. She must have apparently thought I was pretty hot too. But she sticks a camera out the window, and she takes my picture. And it's such a good picture, I decided, well, I'll put it up in her lecture. By the way, if you're interested in her photography, just contact my wife, and she can show you all of the pictures that she's taken. The city's the new smoking. In the study, they found that levels of exercise didn't matter when it came to preventing early death. You could run 10 miles, and if you spent the rest of your day on your duff, those folks had a higher rate of early death, regardless of age, regardless of whether or not they exercised. That there's a connection between early death and sitting a lot. In fact, you can meet the American College of Sports Medicine guideline for exercising and still be considered sedentary. If I do my 30 minutes of walking every day like the ACSM says, but I don't do anything else all day long, I'm active and sedentary at the same time, according to the American College of Sports Medicine. So in the study, more time spent sitting equaled earlier death, regardless of body weight, amount of exercise, or age. In other words, when these people weren't exercising, the rest of the time they were just sitting down. And so we pat ourselves on the back and go, wow, I did my 3 miles today. But if I spend the rest of my time sitting, it's not really going to matter, statistically. Males who sit more than 6 hours a day are 18% more likely to have death from heart attack, 7.8% more likely to have death due to diabetes and diabetic complications, compared to those who sit for 3 hours or less per day. Now, even when I try not to sit that much, I sit a lot. We are basically sitters, right? We don't even have to get up and change the channel anymore. But we were never meant to crush ourselves into a chair for 10 hours a day. The body just wasn't meant to do that. So, even after everything I've talked about, compliance for exercise is still pretty low. The number one reason? Lack of time. How many people exercise today? Did you do it because you had just all the time in the world?
Yes.
That's what I think is funny. People say, well, I don't have time. Well, I didn't run today because I have all the time in the world. So how is it that I can run and time's not a factor, but you don't because you don't have time? Did you brush your teeth today? Did you do it because you had time? Come on, deodorant? Because you had a lot of time on your hands, right? Didn't know what else to do.
Yep.
So there's a little bit of priority making here involved. It puzzles me why people don't exercise more. When I was down at Kansas State, we did a study, people coming out of health club. We asked them, do you feel really good? Because what's the best part of exercise? You're done. Right?
Endorphins.
You have to come to class tomorrow. When you're done, right? Almost 100% of the people, if you ask them, do you feel better, will say yes. So we did the study with folks who just had sex. Feel really good? Feel better? The number of people who answered yes was lower than the exercisers. So we went to a restaurant, and we said, feel good, feel better? And the number of people who said yes was even lower than the number of people who said yes who just had sex. And so it's one of the few things that almost 100% of the time when you ask them, do you feel better, they'll say yes. But we still avoid doing it, right? So, where does that leave us? Well, we know that if we can stay out of the medical system, stay off medication, we're probably going to be better off. If we can do natural movement regularly and not see how much time we can spend sitting. Because we have this idea that inactivity is the good life. Right? Well, if I don't have to move, even better. I mean, we're at the point now where we don't have to, I don't have to walk over here and change the slide, right? You don't have to get up and use the telephone anymore, because it's right here in your pocket. And so if we can just do these natural movements regularly, we can avoid the Grim Reaper. Now, it's not a prescription to live forever. I mean, I'm not foolish. I'm not claiming that. But the chronic disease state does not have to be part of the aging process, even though we've associated it with the aging process. And anytime that we can avoid getting into the medical system, taking medication, anytime we can avoid sitting, anytime we can avoid this mentality of, well, if I look a certain way, then I'm healthy. I had a friend tell me one time, he goes, I'm due for a physical. I'm getting older. I need to go in and get a checkup, but I want to lose some weight first because I'm a wreck. And so, like I said, we have this mentality that we have to reach a certain point in how we look in order for the exercise to be doing any good. It can help from day one. I'm going to be available afterwards if anyone wants to ask any questions. We can open it up right now. I also have available information over here if you're interested in losing weight or getting fit. We have some personal training information over here. If there are any folks in need of counseling for healthy behavior change, I have my counseling information over here. I also have a handout of the slides that we just went over, if anyone would like that. There's an exercise prescription for each of the disease states that we talked about in that handout. Now, it's not a comprehensive exercise prescription. It's kind of a guideline. You're going to have to make special considerations if you're working with somebody or if you yourself have osteoporosis. You're going to have to make special considerations if you have rheumatoid arthritis or something like that. But it's a general guideline if you're interested. The American College of Sports Medicine has a great book called Exercise as Medicine that has exercise prescription in it. So if you work with folks like that, check that out. There's information on your way out the door that you can get for counseling and weight loss as well. What questions do you have for me? In academia, all good learning results in more questions. Yes?
A question earlier when you were talking about exercise and treating. I don't remember which one it was you were talking about. But my question was going to be, it's just part of the question, that there's a reason for it. So what kind of bad side effects does exercise have?
The question is, what kind of bad side effects does exercise have? A lot of folks don't want to take up an exercise program because they know they're going to feel sore the next day or the day after. One thing I've noticed about turning 40 is it's not the next day that I'm sore, it's the day after that I'm sore. And so there are a lot of people who avoid exercise for that very reason.
The reason for that question is when we were talking about medicines for ADHD and everything else, okay? If you listen to the advertisements on TV of all the side effects, I keep saying to my husband, why would anyone want to take that?
And like I said, you can overdo it with exercise. In fact, I come from a place where people routinely do, in Boulder. There's a woman that I know who had an eating disorder, came for counseling. She had memberships to 3 different health clubs. Because she would work out for about 4 or 5 hours at one, they'd kick her out because they said you're not healthy, you can't be in here all day. She'd go to the next health club, work out for 4 or 5 hours, they'd kick her out, she'd go to the next health club. So you can't overdo it. But if I'm going to have leg soreness from jogging and I'm trying to treat my depression or my ADHD, that's a lot different than having increased suicidal ideation from going on antidepressant. That's a lot different than a lot of the side effects, sexual side effects, dry mouth. I can stand here all night and make a list of all the side effects. There's a lot of medication for depression and ADHD and things like that. And so if you look at the side effects, they pale in comparison to some of the side effects we get from our medication.
So, in all of your research, is there a child or even an adult who is autistic? Is there any kind of exercises that they can do on a regular basis to improve autism? Horse riding is always supposed to be good for them.
Yeah, we know that like animal therapy, like going to work with therapeutic animals is very helpful. It could be a whole entire another lecture. We know that there it is. There's my next lecture. I have to get kicked out of someplace first. We know that there are strong ties between diet and autism that are starting to emerge and starting to see now. As far as exercise prescription for autistic kids, they can benefit from exercise just like any other kid. They're going to be at the same risk for a sedentary lifestyle that any other kid is going to be at risk for. And so, it's important not to overlook these kiddos. Well, we can't include, this disabled child, but why would we exclude this disabled child? We need to modify our activity, because if we know that they can get the same health benefits, then it's not right to deny them those health benefits, right? You're going to have to take special precautions. You can't just say, okay, go, run and play, because they could run out in front of the car or something. You're going to have to, make modifications and things. But, they can derive the same health benefits as any other child, from a physical education or activity program.
But so you put them into a certain exercise routine.
They like routine. Yeah, they really like routine. And, for some of them, they might like the routine of, this is how far I'm running today, and, marking it up on the wall, like how far they went. And, it's also a chance for the parent to spend time with that child. We know that our pool right across the quad area over here, we have special needs kids that come over a couple times a week to swim. And so it can be adaptive, it can be, accomplished.
I've had people tell me that movement with music and
rhythm, yeah. Yeah, music and rhythm. Yeah, and if you know somebody who is autistic, if you look at the before and after, like just how agreeable they are, or just how cooperative they are, or how attentive to following instructions or something that they are after exercise, you probably notice the difference. Anybody else?
Listening to all the benefits of exercise and that stuff like that, what would you tell somebody is the easiest way to get yourself motivated to start exercising?
What's the easiest way to get motivated to start exercising? I usually just have to look at my kids. Do I want to be around for Vivi's wedding? Do I want to be around to see, my grandkids? Yeah. But it is. What's that? But it is kind of demotivating to have been a certain way for a number of years, and to think, okay, it's going to take me a while to back that train up a little bit and to maybe start seeing results. One of the things that we know is the more sedentary I am, the more unmotivated I am to do it. If we can start, I like to call them rituals instead of habits. How many people have ever tried to start a habit? I'm the only one. Okay. Yeah. If you've ever tried to start a habit, you've noticed that sometimes they stick and sometimes they don't, right? So I tell people, start a ritual. Make it a ritual. Because how many people have a ritual? Either a faith-based ritual, or maybe like a family ritual or something like that. Those tend to stick more. And so if you make it a ritual, and you can say, okay, I'm doing something good for myself today. Even though you're not very motivated, by the end of about 30 or 40 days, we know that people who try to make healthy behavior change are able to make that stick. And the more you do it, the more motivated you're going to be. In fact, we know that if people make it a goal, and I've seen this, okay, we're going to make it a goal that you exercise every single day for the next year. Even if it's just, 15 minutes of walking or something like that, every single day. We know that the closer that they get to the end of that year, if they have 250 days under their belt, they're much, much less likely to say, okay, I'm just going to blow off today, than they are if they're like 10 days into that or 20 days into it. And so the answer isn't simple, but if you can force yourself to do it, you'll find yourself wanting to do it. Because we change our brain chemistry, we can change ourselves on a molecular level. And we don't think it can be so, but it is. We can change on a genetic level, just based on our stress level, our activity level, and things like that. That's a whole other lecture also. And so, just because you have a particular amount of motivation today, doesn't mean that 10 or 20 or 30 days into it, your motivation level is going to be the same. Now, I tell people, find something fun. Like, you have any CrossFitters in here? CrossFit? Yeah. There are people who love flipping over the tractor tire and climbing the rope and doing that. I don't. And so I probably would if I did it. Maybe I'm trying to avoid it so I don't make that my new habit. But there's some things that people don't like. Anybody want to strap themselves to a weight machine and see how much they can lift? And, there's some people who don't want to do that. And so I tell people, find what you like and the fitness follows. Because you're not going to stick to something that you don't like. So I'm never going to tell somebody, well, this is the only way to get fit. You've got to strap yourself to a weight machine. Because what I found was, I'd take people and I'd say, okay, what do you like to do? Well, I like to play tennis. Okay. So we get them playing tennis. You got to get back to playing tennis. Find a tennis partner, find somebody to play tennis with. And the next thing you know, winter comes and you say, if you got the weight room a couple times a year, or a couple times, some people only get the weight room a couple times a year. If you got the weight room a couple times a week, you'd be a better tennis player. And sometimes that's the motivation enough to get them in the weight room. Maybe they don't particularly enjoy lifting weights. I mean, I know a lot of guys in a lot of sports that don't particularly enjoy lifting weights, but they know it makes them a better football player. Or they know it makes them a better baseball player. And so they do it. And so find something that you like and the fitness follows. There's a woman I knew trying to lose weight all of her life. And skating rink opened in town. And she's, I haven't skated since I was a little girl, and I'm going to, take up skating again. Went skating every single weekend. At the end of a couple of months, she's like, what do you know? I've lost 25 pounds without even trying. She was exercising and didn't even know it. I hear it all the time in counseling. I got this dog. Now I have to take the dog for a walk 3 times a day. The next time they come in, we lost a few pounds. No, I'm not really trying. In fact, successful weight loss is so rare in our country that medical physicians are trained to investigate why you lost weight. If you come in and you've lost weight and you tell them, I'm trying to lose weight, they're trained to be skeptical of that. They're trained to say, there's got to be some kind of disease state going on here. We've got to figure out why they're losing weight. Because it's so rare. And so, find something you like, and the fitness will follow. Because if I don't like it, anybody one of these wake up at 4:30 in the morning people and exercise people? Yeah. I've never been able to follow that kind of regimen. Now, there have been times in my life where maybe I had an 8 o'clock class like every morning, and so it's like, that's when I got to exercise, right? And so I could make myself do it for a few weeks that I needed to do it, but I could never make it stick, right? And so there's some times where it's like, maybe I don't like working out at 7 o'clock at night. I mean, if you're like me, when you get home, you kick your shoes off, they just stay off, right? So thank you all for coming tonight. I tell people, you got to find something you like or you're not going to stick with it. And, for some people, it's just going out dancing. Oh, honey, you haven't taken me dancing for a while. Okay, let's go out dancing. But if you go into it like, got to walk my laps, you're not going to be able to stick with it. But if you make a ritual out of, hey, every Friday night, we go dancing. If you make a ritual out of, we've made a ritual in our family that on Thanksgiving morning, we go for a jog before dinner. It's just become a ritual, a tradition. So if you can make it a ritual, and you can make it stick, you can actually change how you think about it. You can find something you like to do. Otherwise, you're not going to stick with it. And like I said, we're talking about natural movements here. Now, that's not to say, I'm against weightlifting, because I love weightlifting. I'm not against training for a marathon. Go train for a marathon if you want. But what I'm saying is, we have this idea that, well, I've got to, strap myself to this machine. I've got to do this drudgery work that I don't want to do. That's fine if you want to do it. If you don't, you're not going to stick with it. So find something you like to do. Who else? The question was, exercising before bedtime, is it good or bad? Does it get you too pumped up? I've actually seen research for both. I've seen, it helps you sleep better. And I've heard that it raises your body temperature and gets your heart rate up and gets you too amped up to go to bed. I think it's kind of a personal experience. Because if that's the only time you can, when I worked for Kansas State football, we'd be in the football complex every day from noon until 10:30 at night. We were also full-time students. The only time I could get my workout in was if I went over to the rec center at 10:30 at night. That's the only time I could do it. I was also 20 years old, and when I got home, I could knock right off to sleep. I found as I got older, though, if I work out at 10 o'clock at night, I'm supercharged and ready to go. And so for me, it doesn't work. I mean, I might still work out at night if that's the only other time I can do it, but I know that that's going to be an effect on me. And so it's kind of a personal thing. If that's the only time you can work out and it doesn't affect you, then great. If you find that, wow, I'm really not able to sleep because I'm ready to go now, you might have to make an alteration. Anyone else? I've got all the answers. Come on. I'll let you know the next time I get kicked out of someplace, because I'll come up with a lecture for it. We'll do this again. Like I said, I have my information here. If you think of a question you want to ask me or email me or text me, it's also out on the table. If you're interested in starting an exercise program, and you think only movie stars hire personal trainers, right? It's not true. Some of us have just forgotten some of our basic body movements. We haven't done them for so long. And you don't realize until you go to set those cans on the shelf, you're like, I can't do an overhead press anymore. Or you go to push yourself up out of a chair. I can't do a tricep press anymore. And so we forget until, because it happens so slowly until it's too late. So we're not talking about you have to be a Hollywood type and we're going to do some fancy, exercises with you. If you're interested in, some personal training, losing weight, there are people out there that can help you with that. We have some information tonight as well. And so we're talking about basic body movements, just getting up and moving, just moving your body, just doing this. Produce more neurotransmitters. So pick up some information if you're interested. I have packets of the handout of the slides that we did right here. I didn't want to hand them out because I didn't want you to look ahead in the note packet while I was doing my thing. Because what I was going to talk about was so controversial, I didn't want you to not be surprised. Thank you all for coming. Again, if you have questions, please let me know. I'll be around after.